Good morning and welcome to today's Diversity and Inclusion webinar, Words Matter, Navigating and Understanding Diversity Terms and Phrases. My name is Stephanie Hurst and I'm the Member Program Specialist with the National Apartment Association. Thank you for joining us for this incredibly important topic. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping points. This presentation will be recorded and will be posted on the Diversity and Inclusion Resources page early next week. During the discussion, you may type questions into the chat box on your screen, and we will share them with our presenter. We have left time at the end of the webinar for questions. And now I will turn the microphone over to John Sons, a member of NAA's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, to introduce today's outstanding speaker. John?
Thanks, Stephanie. On behalf of the National Apartment Association and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, I am just really excited to be able to present today's presenter, Olivia Lockwood. She has 37 years of experience as an invisible minority in the field of technical sales and training. As an active coach and facilitator, she defines terms and shares experiences to provide options to participate, to open up to improving relationships with more diverse groups of people. Olivia received a Bachelor of Business Administration from Texas A&M Mays Business School. She's a professional certified coach with the International Coach Federation and a certified professional in talent development from the Association for Talent Development. And I just couldn't be more thrilled and excited to introduce Olivia. Olivia, take it away.
Thank you so much, John and Stephanie. Don't you love when outstanding, like no hype there, but I appreciate it. I'm super excited to be here, with all 75, 77 of us. So to get us started, I wanted to ask you to let's sort of practice what we preach. I would like to introduce myself, and while I'm telling you a little bit about myself, if you could consider these 4 fill in the blanks and imagine yourself introducing you a little bit differently than you normally do. I love the people who wrote in the chat, good morning. So my name is pronounced Olivia. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a multiracial, cisgender, independent contractor who works in sales training and facilitation. I currently live in Richmond, Virginia. So my hope is by just reminding us that, as we're going to talk about words and phrases in diversity and inclusion, that we all start to practice those ourselves. And I do hope that you'll use the chat. As we go along, I'll share a few stories from my life, I'll share some research, but most importantly, I just want to make sure we have a bit of fun focusing on some of these words and phrases that can be very tricky. I wanted to bring up the National Apartment Association mission because, we want to be a resource, for all stakeholders in the rental housing industry. And all is a big word. Last summer, the CEO, Robert Pinegar of the National Apartment Association, put out a statement, as many organizations did. I'm sure some of your member organizations put out similar statements. And he chose to use a quote from Maya Angelou. She happens to be one of my all-time favorite inspiring women. So I thought as a foundation for our topic today, we would use another Maya Angelou quote. Maya said, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." So I say to myself often, now that I know better, do better. And I hope that after, our hour together, you'll know better and you'll be able to do better. We're all on different places in our journey. So I wanted to just make sure that we have sort of a shared goal. The tagline for the National Apartment Association is "We lead the way home." And home has so many different meanings, right? 2 more Maya Angelou quotes, it's never ending. The ache for home lives in all of us, the safe place where we can go as we are and not be questioned, right? So home symbolizes safety, not only physical safety, but psychological safety. Home also, in another quote, I long, as does every human being, to be at home wherever I find myself. And this touches on that idea of diversity and inclusion and the sense of belonging, that we sometimes feel so at home, we're our full true selves. Other times we just don't. So I thought as a, just sort of a theme for us is how do we build more of that belonging? And then of course, being hosted by the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, I couldn't leave out their mission statement. So we want to model inclusion and embrace the diverse backgrounds and perspective of those with whom we work. And this, I hope you'll see, is across our entire hour together, that you'll see diversity in all of its elements is touched upon. We can't cover such a big topic fully, but we will touch on a lot. So the way I look at it, if we've got a vision, we've got a statement, we know what diversity is, right? We're all good, right? Fist bumps all around. What do we need to talk about it anymore? We get it. Well, is that really true? We still have these moments, right? We still have these really unpleasant moments. So what I was asked to do is find a way to help people create more clarity around the terms that we're using in the D&I space. And so we looked at hundreds of topics and thousands of words, and we narrowed it down to 5 topics. But before we get to those topics, I want to give these moments a label. I want to give them a name. And I also want to offer you 2 things. The first is, as Stephanie said, you will get a recording and this PowerPoint deck with all of my notes within about 7 days. The second thing is, if you email me, and my email information will be at the end, I'll send you an additional PDF document that has 30 pages of hundreds of more terms. So if you really want to explore the words, the definitions more, reach out and ask for that. But the first label I want to give you is what Dolly Chu calls these moments. She calls them UGG moments. And you can just see this guy, he's like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. We don't know whether he did something or he watched something happen, but we know he's not happy. So UGG is an acronym. It stands for unintentional, galling, and hurtful, or sometimes you'll hear hateful. But the sense of UGG, right? That face, palm to face. So I just want us to realize we're trying to reduce these UGG moments. They're never going to go to 0, but we want to reduce them. And I want to tell you an absolute truth, okay? We are going to make mistakes, right? We are going to make mistakes. If we try to be more inclusive, we're going to say something that unfortunately will offend somebody. And the only thing we can do is take a breath, apologize, and really mean it. I'm sorry for hurting your feelings. Like, that simple. And I have a little mantra that I want to share with you. It comes from Paul Saginaw. He's the founder of Zingerman's Delis up in Detroit. He says, don't get furious, get curious. So when you feel that defensiveness or you feel that hurt, don't get angry, right? Get curious, ask a question. So hopefully as a platform, a setting, an opening, that was reasonable enough. And now let's dive into some misunderstood terms. As I said, there were hundreds of topics and thousands of terms we could choose. So with Stephanie and John's help, I took that list and I chose 5 topics. Now, even 5 topics, for the next 30 minutes is a lot. So, I'm hoping we can touch on each of these, and then you can ask some really good questions in the chat, and then we'll have time at the end to answer those. My goal is to finish talking to you at between 11:40 and 11:45 Eastern Standard Time. So we'll have 15 to 20 minutes for questions at the end. Let's see if I can do this quickly. All right. The first topic is impact. So I'd like everybody to remember that motives matter less than outcomes, right? We measure ourselves based on our intention. I didn't mean to hurt. I didn't mean for that to happen. But we measure other people on their impact. We have to separate the two. We don't know what's going on in their head or their heart. So we have to think, oh, if I hurt their feelings, it must be true. And the other belief I hold is nobody wakes up in the morning ready to tick everybody off. Like, we don't wake up and go, yep, I'm headed to work and I'm going to see how many people I can annoy today. We don't do that. right? We wake up, we're like, I'm going to be a good person. I'm going to get through the day, make new friends. And then we have one of those moments. So please, let's be kind to ourselves. Now, while I put up the specific definition of intention versus impact, you know, I thought it was useful. John shared with me that a huge part of the fair housing lawsuits is about whether you is about discrimination, whether you intended to or not. So this is not just something that we need to remember in our everyday lives as we interact with the people around us, but we need to remember that this also has legal implications. I wanted to share a little story with you. You know, when John said that I'm an invisible minority, most people do not know, and many still don't believe, that I am biracial. My mother is Jamaican, my father is Irish, and I grew up in Jamaica. So often, friends and acquaintances who know that will introduce me and they'll say, oh, this is Olivia, my Jamaican friend, or oh, this is Olivia, my Jamaican American friend. And I brace, like literally, viscerally, I clench up anytime someone says that to a new person, because more times than not, the new person will say something to me like, what? You're not Jamaican, right? And like they're calling my friends liars to their faces. And I usually try to be polite. Well, what makes you say that? And eventually they'll reveal that I don't look like what they expect a Jamaican to look like. It's an ugh moment for me. And sometimes it's an ugh moment for them. And the reason I bring that example up is I want you to do some self-reflection. Just take a few seconds and think about an experience, a time where either somebody said something that hurt you, that would be choice 2, or you said something that hurt someone, that would be choice 1. And just reflect on these 4 questions. You know, what was your intention if you hurt somebody? And how did you actually hurt them? Describe it, use some adjectives. And then, did you say you were sorry? Yes or no? And when you said it, did you really mean it, or were you just trying to get away as fast as possible? Right? And if you could have a do-over, and remember in life, we don't get very many do-overs. So this is an if, it's a hypothetical. What would you do differently? Because that could be your instead behavior for the future. So I'm going to take a moment, take a breath, check my notes, and give you, 10 to 15 seconds. Just try to come up with an example. And hey, overachievers out there, if you get 2, that's fine. You don't have to write these down. I just want you to think about them so that this learning moment is more impactful. Now, we're going to go to the first of our next 4 topics. So this is the second of our 5. The first one was impact. The second one is now diversity. We know that diversity is a big topic, and there's all the diversity and inclusion work that companies and individuals are doing. Diversity in its simplest form is a fact. It's about representation, right? There are so many employees and so many are of these different categories. It is what we measure. The list of attributes that we can measure is super long, okay? It can be skill sets, education, language, gender, countries represented, all kinds of things. But there is a generally accepted set of characteristics that researchers in sociology, psychology, and anthropology agree on. They call these characteristics dimensions, and they use the word dimensions because it implies a spectrum. It means you can be more or less of something. So I want to show you this image. It's a little of an eye chart, with the 6 wedges in the middle and then the 23 wedges around the outside. But these are the generally accepted diversity dimensions. Most everything we talk about would be represented on this wheel. So the first thing to recognize is that there are certain aspects of our self, our identity, that we're inherited, right? We can't really change them. And then there are those on the outside where we learn those over our lives and we explore them. So the first thing about diversity is it's not just about having different people present, it's making sure their voices and their experiences are heard and used to benefit decision-making, whatever the decisions you have to make are. And then I want to make a distinction because once in a while I get asked, what's the difference between race and ethnicity? So race is physical traits. They're the things you inherit, and ethnicity are cultural identifications. Those are things that you learn. And just a simple, distinction, but I want us to remember this wheel. I'll refer to the wheel and the diversity dimensions across our time together. We're going to go to a tricky topic. Start off right away. One of the wedges in the middle said sexual orientation, and most of us have heard a lot about the LGBTQ. And I actually think the next slide is the reason I'm speaking to you today. Sarah Keene on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee at NAA saw this next slide and said, oh, could you come and talk to us? So when we hear these words, most of us realize, okay, that we know the words, right? Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, we know them. The first three describe sexual orientation, but the T actually describes gender identity or gender expression, one or the other, depending on who you speak to. So I just want us to remember that not only do we sort of have to think through the ones we know, there may be a bunch you don't know. There are actually 11 commonly. In the US, we usually say LGBTQ. In the rest of the world, we say LGBTQIA, right? I don't know anywhere where they put the P on, but please notice, right? There are 2 T's, there are 2 Q's, and there are 2 A's. So right here, we have some possible misunderstandings. And here's the one I really want to point out. Please look at the second T. I'm circling it in orange right now. That word is outdated. So let's not use that word anymore if we can help it. If we make a mistake, we'll be forgiven, but let's try to eliminate that one. So my hope is that you'll recognize, oh, I've got some more learning to do. Also, within the gender diversity dimensions, yeah, queer or questioning. Love it, Tony. I just saw that. Yep, and the plus, thanks, Regina. I'm reading a few of the chats. Thank you for putting those there. Yep, so the queer or questioning is shown in this list of 11 as well. So I'm really, see, you're already ahead of us. The next thing that I would like to mention is within the inner circle, the 6 dimensions, right? The race, the ethnicity, your abilities, your age, your sexual orientation, and your gender, there are some isms. Okay, I call them the isms, and many of us have heard them. We've heard racism, we've heard sexism, few of us have heard ageism or ableism, and not so much here in the US, but often elsewhere you hear classism. Well, these isms are describing social phenomena where prejudice or bias is accompanied by the power to systematically enact it. A group of people has a bias and they have the ability to force their bias on others. And there are millions of examples of this. What I wanted to share with you is that, and oh, by the way, there are other social phenomena like this that don't have an ism. So, we talk about religious intolerance or, neurodiversity. They don't have an ism. So I just wanted to let you know that I wanted to just pick out 1 or 2 to tell you a little bit more about and hope that your curiosity will be sparked and you'll learn more on your own. So the first one I picked out was one that is coming up more recently, and this is ableism. And this is where discrimination is in favor of able-bodied people. So we contrast negatively the norm being able. So we use these expressions, that's so lame, and you guys are crazy, all of that. It's not kind, as we know, and it is a type of discrimination. It's a type, we reduce our respect for diversity when we do this. So I changed a couple years ago. Many of us did this. I used to say, had a senior moment, and I realized that was ageism, discriminating against older people or discriminating against anyone based on their age. They're too young, right? Well, maybe they're not. So I stopped using senior moment and I started using brain cramp. and hopefully it's a little, less likely to offend. Another one that I did, now this is a little while ago, okay, but I used to say, oops, that was a blonde moment. And then I realized that's awful. That is just perpetuating the dizzy blonde stereotype. So I stopped using that as well. And I just say, oops, lost it. So I just want us to think about some really simple word choices that can make such a difference when we're with other people. All right. I also read this example, and this really struck me. Most people who wear eyeglasses would not consider themselves disabled. But imagine a world where you couldn't get eyeglasses, right? What would happen if you couldn't get your glasses or your contacts? Would you still be able to drive? Would you still be able to work at your computer? Would you still be able to read the books? 75% of the US population wears glasses or contacts, and we would all be considered disabled, right? But because we have an easy natural accommodation, we never think about it. And my hope as we move into the future and a better world is that every kind of disability would be that easily accommodated. So this is why we want to talk about these topics. Let me move on to another tricky topic. So this was a specific question that Sarah got. So she asked me specifically, what is the difference between racism, racist, and racist remark? Tova, I hope I said your name properly. We use bananas. I love it. I love it. I'm going to steal that one. Oh, that's good. So what's the difference between racism, racist, and racist remark? Okay, so racism is a belief, okay, that different races possess different qualities, characteristics, and that distinguishes them as inferior or superior to one another, all right? Racism is the act of marginalizing or oppressing people based on one of those beliefs, okay? Now, a racist is a noun, and I will tell you, I believe in North America, this is the worst label that you can give a person, that it will be instant defense, absolutely not, could not even happen. And the reason that that is happening is because of a change in the definition of the word. So the noun racist, right, is a person, and the adjective, like racist remark, is a comment that feels mean. This is the modern, today definition, right? Racist remark used to be more like a racist. It meant, right, that what you said was, unpleasant to someone, being mean to someone. But what it really means now is, how does that person feel? So again, going back to intention versus impact, our intention is not to be mean. Our intention is not to hurt. It's a belief we hold, right? But if we hurt somebody else's feeling, then it becomes racist. And so because the definition is held by the receiver, we have a lot of learning to do. And this can get really confusing. So the simplest way I think about it is, right, if I don't need to describe the physical attributes of a person, I don't. Sounds simple. I just don't. You'll find if you remove describing physical attributes from your vocabulary, how often you don't need it. And we're going to talk later about how do we talk about topics and issues. But if you're talking about a person, really think about if you even need to describe them. Now, if we deepen this, right, this was part 2 of Sarah's really good question. Is there a difference between systemic racism and structural racism? Those two words actually mean the same thing, okay? They are forms of racism that are embedded through procedures and processes and laws. There is a smaller subset called institutional racism, and that's like sort of a subset of systemic or structural racism, and that's blocking people from access to goods, services, or opportunities. And that goes back to hiring practices and employment law. We contrast systemic or structural racism with caste. Now, again, most of us in America, we're not in the United States, we're not thinking about caste even as many as 5 years ago. However, if you grew up in the West Indies like I did, we always talked about this. We always knew that caste was the foundation for these social hierarchies that broke down on race. So I just would like to be, super clear that what caste means, right, is that there is this granting of privilege or withholding of respect, status, honor, attention, many privileges, resources, benefits. It's huge. It's literally the withholding of human kindness to someone based on their standing in society. So the way I like to make a distinction, I borrow this image from Isabel Wilkerson, whose book Caste is a must read if you're interested in this topic. She talks about society, the hierarchy in society like a house, and the foundation is caste, and the walls and the roof are systemic and structural racism. And she says, when someone says, yeah, but, I wasn't alive when there was slavery in the US, my family never did these things. Why should I have to be aware of it? Well, it's because like a house, if you're the new owner and you don't fix your foundation, your walls and ceiling can fall down. So I like us to think about caste being the foundation and structural or systemic racism being part of the walls and the roofs. That if we fix the foundation, we have a chance of shoring up the rest of the house. So, an image that might help you separate those two, huge ideas. And I am not trying to intentionally remove the controversy. For those of you who've read in this space, there is a belief that race is a social construct, that it is not biological. And there is a lot of evidence for that. We know exactly the date in 1663 when race was described for the first time as 5 levels. We know in 1778 when it was described as 7. We know before that there's no written record or oral tradition of defining people by color. So we have some evidence for it. But whatever your belief is, I just want us to start to understand what these terms mean when you hear them, so that we have less misunderstanding. Now, wow, there are so many labels for skin color. And the reason I chose this photo is this young lady is another Jamaican American, and she has one of the best podcasts I've ever listened to about how to describe people. So the first thing she says is, when in doubt, be specific, okay? And the reason that I, want to say that is, if you came home to your family and you had 3 children, you would not say the children got D's at school. Their grades were D's in biology. You wouldn't say that. You would say Olivia got a D and Richard got a B and Norma got a C, right? So we need to be specific and we need to ask. We need to know that categorization tends to be less helpful than not, but we still need it. We still need ways to categorize. So let's break some of these down. I put a lot of these words on the next slide. I'm going to go through them, pretty quickly, and you try to do some contrasting. So Black is the largest group, okay? What we mean by that is anybody who fits into a category that we believe is not white, right? We put them in the Black category. We contrast it with African American. And African American does get a lot of confusion. In 2007, when the Pew Research Foundation asked, most Americans chose African American as their preferred label. But in 2020, when they asked, most prefer Black. And the reason for this is our influx of new Americans from the African continent. So African American refers to a group of people whose shared history includes ancestors who were enslaved people here. It does not include our Kenyan Americans, our Zimbabwean Americans, our Ethiopian Americans. It only includes those Americans whose history of being enslaved puts them into that category. Black covers all of our other countries and cultures when it comes to this large group. So I wanted to share that first. Then we have this POC, people of color, right? people of color became popular. We started using it in order to really, broaden the group and say everybody, right? Well, it fell out of favor pretty quickly, and we replaced it with BIPOC, right? Black, Indigenous people of color, to separate the experiences of Blacks, Native Americans, and all the other people of color, right? And people of color, that can mean, so many things: Asian, Middle Eastern, all kinds of other groupings. So again, very large categories. Then we go to Black and Brown, okay? Black and Brown, again, fairly recent. We started hearing it because we're trying to include, right, the Blacks who are African American plus all the other people from countries that are not the US, and add in, right, our Hispanic, Latino, Asian, Pacific Islander friends. So we started using Black and Brown, and we typically think of it as Black Americans and Latina Americans. Some people put the Indian in there, the Asian, but others don't. So it's still a little confusing, but just ask, what do you mean by that if someone uses it? Who are you including in that group? AAPI we're hearing, right? And this stands for Asian American and Pacific Islanders. Now in the UK, we use BAME, which stands for, Black, Asian, and Middle Eastern. So there's an ethnic minority, minority ethnic. That's changed too. So again, we're trying to have a title, a label for a group of people. And then the last one is Latinx. And this is a very tricky one right now, because in the press, in our public lives, we hear Latinx, and only 1% of Latino men accept this label. Less than 30% of Latina women accept this label. But we use it because the dominant group feels like they can label anyone. So be really careful with this label. We use it in research, right, to cover male and female, but in their preferred labeling of individual people, they don't really like this label. So hopefully, I know that was really quick, and I know I'm running behind time, but I'm hoping that going through that helps a bit. The next thing that I was going to talk about was, I don't see color, this post-racial idea. And I just want to remind you that Trevor Noah had a great joke. He was speaking with Tommy Lauren in 2016, and she said she didn't see color. And he said, I don't believe you. Like, you drove here. How did you stop at the stoplights? Of course we see color. But what's even more important is that if you say to someone, oh, I don't see color, what they might hear is, you don't see me, right? You don't see me as a human being, because my color, the tone of my skin represents my lived experiences. So again, if you like this topic, I put the image of Ijeoma Oluo's book, So You Want to Talk About Race, and that's a really good resource. Another thing that's happened recently is, capitalizing the word Black to represent that shared cultural history. And we don't capitalize W, because when you put a capital W, that was the way that white supremacist groups used to write their name, and we don't want to do that. We want to not enhance the negative side of the white. So if you were curious about that, like I said, we could talk about all of these forever. Now here's a big question, okay? I haven't seen your faces, but I want you to think about, how do you know you are white? How do you know that? Think about your reaction to the question and then your response. I'm not asking you to put it in the chat or anything crazy like that, but just want us to remember, 32% of Hispanics identify as white, right? There was a time where Italians in America were not considered white. Now they are. It's changing, but how do you know? Typically, when I ask this question, I get a lot of silence, because we kind of don't know, right? And all that points out is to a lack of literacy around race, and especially our own. And it's really important to remember that our society, I'm going to use this word, races everyone. We are all raced. We all have a group within which we fit. And that grouping gives us advantages and disadvantages. So typically, if you're brand new to this subject, you don't really know what to do with this knowledge. You just start to feel guilty and bad, and then you just go deeper into the silence. Please don't make that choice today. But just think about, how do you really know what group you're in? That leads us to this big topic of privilege. This is our third of the 5 topics, and I got to cover 3 topics in 2 minutes. How's that going to work? Let's see. So privilege, there are many types, right? There's economic, there's educational, there's religious, there's neurological, there's all kinds of privilege, all right? And, I'm going to do a 10-question quiz for us to just notice some of our own privilege. All you have to do is count, all right? So as these questions come up, if it's true for you, give yourself 1 and then go 1, 2, 3, and count. The maximum you can get is 10. All right, and I'm going to read along, and as soon as I finish reading, then I'm going to move to the next question. Here you go. Everybody play along. Number 4. Whoops, I did 7 and 8 together. Sorry. Last one. And you should have a total under 10. The first time I took this quiz, I got a 6. And it doesn't matter what number you get, it's just a recognition that based on certain things we inherited and certain life experiences, we have more or less privilege. Now, this idea of white privilege came from a researcher and scholar named Peggy McIntosh in the 1970s, and we've been building on it ever since. So she had the idea of a knapsack of privilege. And that meant that she thought we were carrying, that certain groups carried extra resources. So there are 4 big myths around privilege, and I want to go through these, quite quickly. So the first one is that privileged people are selfish, and ignorant. No, that's not true, okay? Privilege doesn't speak to anyone's character. The second myth, you're either privileged or you're not. Again, not true. Privilege, or the lack of it, comes in multiple forms. Everyone has some privilege and everyone is lacking some privilege, right? If you have privilege, you haven't experienced hardship. This is probably the most common one. No, privilege in one area does not erase struggles or hardship in another area, right? And you don't have any privilege you didn't earn. Again, not true. Some privileges are inherited and others are earned. So I want you to really think about this. And like the word racist, the word privilege is so charged. It has such a negative connotation these days. Again, I don't even use the word anymore. I talk about tailwinds and headwinds. And this is a fascinating topic. On screen in front of you is my analysis, a gentle analysis. I didn't want to reveal everything about myself to you, of tailwinds, right? Those parts of my lived experience that help me, and headwinds, those part of my lived experiences that hinder me. And a really interesting, and for me, very fun piece of research is called tailwind-headwind asymmetry. And what this means is that as human beings, similar to loss aversion, and a Nobel Prize winning theory, we over-focus on headwinds. We can remember all the struggle and the pain and the disadvantage, and we minimize the tailwinds, the things that helped us. So if we imagine, we're over focusing on, me being female, or me growing up poor, or, being told all the time I'm not who I am, I could really become quite bitter. But if I switch a little bit and say, no, but I have all these other great things. I am a native English speaker. I speak 3 versions of English, British, American, and Patois. That's amazing. It's a joke. But I just want us to be really clear. Looking at it this way can help us understand each other and ourselves better. So in an effort to live to my time and have lots of room for questions, I'm going to hop on to topic 3 of 5, which is equity. Okay, so equity is the quality of being fair and or impartial. And of course, we're not talking about financial equity, the assets in your apartment buildings. No, we're talking about equity as in human social equity. And the next 4 images, I hope will help you rethink some of the cliches like, work hard, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, America is the land of opportunity. I want you to think through some of those as you look at these next 4 images. I'm going to let you read them. So the first image says reality, right? There are chasms in the distribution of resources. So, one person has so many boxes, that they have a bird's eye view, and another person is in a hole. So that's what the reality is. It's pretty unequal. Equality is the state of being equal. And it has the idea that if we give everybody the same thing, right? If we give exactly the same thing, then life gets better. Well, it doesn't always, right? What we really want is social equality, where, all people can participate in freedom of speech, property rights, access to goods and services, and civil rights equally. And equality doesn't get us there. Equity does. Equity means we give to each person the support they need. So it varies by individual. This is a very difficult concept in the United States. It is less difficult in some other places that I've had the privilege to live, but it is what we're all talking about when we talk about equity and inclusion, diversity and inclusion. We're like, how do we make it more equitable? And this is a great goal, right? We call it the second objective of D&I programs, because the true objective is this 4th picture. It's justice, right? What we really want, but we don't know how to do yet, I don't know, is we want to get rid of those barriers, right? The systemic barriers. Now, there are 4 types of barriers, but I'm not going to describe them. They are in the notes. You can grab these notes when they are posted and read them. So I'm going to move. What we really want is justice. And I am referring to the title of the poem that Amanda Gorman read at the last inauguration, right? The hill we climb. We're climbing a hill from inequality through equality onto equity, hoping that we'll be at justice, right? The hill is a metaphor for progress, and the outcome is justice for all. 4th topic, quickly, is inclusion. Now, inclusion, right, means more united in our thinking. So if we think about diversity are the facts, inclusion is the choice to invite people in, the choice to ask for their ideas. So when we think about inclusion, one of the easiest things we can do is remember our names, right? It is so difficult sometimes to say to someone, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Please say it for me first so I say it properly. And if I mess it up, please tell me again. I want to learn it. That is so much more inclusive than, wow, Sandra Kahneman is a very difficult name for me. Can I just call you Sandy? It's a different experience, right? So please, think about all these little ways. We want inclusion. It's active. It's the choice to invite. Now, we had the dimensions on our diversity wheel, 6 wedges in the middle and the 23 wedges on the outside. On this slide are 15 attributes. And the reason these attributes are so important is they are the attributes most likely to be chosen by an organization as part of their equity and inclusion efforts. I want to point out 2 things. This image belongs to Clorox, and I put some notes around how I got it and things like that. And also, I'm always asked, what about veterans? Like, where are they? Well, veterans are not listed as one of the dimensions, but their need usually comes under skills, experiences, right? Because they have had such a different set of training in their earlier lives before we hire them into corporations. So I just wanted to mention that. And then another big topic is intersectionality. So the previous puzzle pieces help us understand each attribute, each dimension or facet of inclusion. But intersectionality reminds us of the complexity and the wondrous complexity of the human experience, right? The overlapping of the circles reminds us that the experience of a Black woman is different than the experience of a Black man or a white woman or a Black man. Those two aspects of identity, Black and female gender, create intersectionality that is different. So we have to consider the whole person. Now, you know, when this idea was brought up in 1989 by Kimberly Crenshaw, this was like some really sort of obscure legal concept, but now it's in the mainstream. And I really just would feel like it's a disservice if I didn't tell you that there are actually 3 debates when it comes to intersectionality. The first debate is, what does it really mean? Crenshaw will tell you that what it means is that we look at all of the attributes. The second, right, debate is activists seeking to eliminate disparities between the groups and how the activists have interpreted this term. And then the third debate is how a part of our political class is responding to the use of the term by activists. So if you've ever heard, you know, the argument, I'm not a feminist because I don't believe women should be more powerful than men, that is similar to what's happened to intersectionality. You know, the theories of feminism never said that, you know, women should have more than any other group. It said women should be equal. Now we used gender parity for feminism in the old school, and we use feminism to say those outrageous group of women who, you know, believe they should be the top of the pyramid. Okay. So I wanted to introduce the idea of intersectionality. And now I want to introduce our last topic, which is belonging. So diversity are the facts, who is represented. Inclusion is the choice. Have you included them? Have you asked for their thoughts to be included in your decision-making? And then belonging is a feeling. And I was going to play to you the Black Eyed Peas, I've got a feeling, but I don't have time. So I'm just going to remind you that there is an expression, okay, called, diversity is being invited to the dance. That I've mixed it up, but here, I'll put it on the screen for you. Diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance. That was Verna's expression. And then belonging is dancing like others are not there. So that's where you've been asked, you know, what song should we put in the playlist, right? You know, and just, you can be your whole self. If you go back to our opening, it's that safe place. It's like being at home in the world. The last image, and I'm really going to just sort of hop over this, is the Venn diagram where diversity, equity, and inclusion create belonging. And if you only have 2 of those 3, you have, you know, a bad situation in the workforce where that is happening. This is a list of tips, right? I want to call people in. Remember, that just means that you praise in public and you punish in private. Any reaffirming and reinforcing words, say them out loud in large groups, but any change or redirecting words, say them privately, right? Commit to knowing more. Like Maya said, once you know better, do better. All right, I'm going to leave the other ideas there. And here we are at questions. I've saved only 9 minutes. I am so sorry, but are there some questions? I'll ask John because he was going to manage those. Did anyone put questions in the chat?
Olivia, that was both educational and thought-provoking. It was, I'm not surprised. It gives you a lot to think about. So having said that, I got the feeling as you were going through your presentation, I could sense people were really thinking and absorbing what you were saying. So are there any questions for Olivia. We're watching the chat room here. If you've got a question for Olivia, if you'll go ahead and type that into the chat room. We do have just a couple of minutes here that we'd like to field some questions if you have any out there. You know, it's always hard, I know, in a webinar to see the body language of those that are participating in the webinar. But Olivia, I got the sense that people were really just engaged in what you were saying. Can we get a copy of this presentation emailed? Olivia, you want to address that?
I don't see why not. I know that the PowerPoint deck is going to be shared with the recording on the YouTube channel. That'll be in about 7 days. If you need it sooner than that and you email me, I'm happy to send you a copy of the PowerPoint. I also have a PDF file that expands on the actual terms that go into all the racial, religious, location-based. I can send that too. So if you do email me, please tell me what you want and tell me how you're going to use it, just for my own curiosity. And
Olivia, we've got a couple of questions that have come in, 2 or 3 here. We'll try to get through them quickly. What are your thoughts on humor as a way to call someone out? Does that minimize it, or is it an appropriate way to get someone to do some thinking?
Oh my God, I so love that question. All right. So here's the thing with humor. If the people hearing the joke all have the same context, it can work. The risk is that they don't have the same context. I was told a joke yesterday. I had no idea what they were talking about. Everybody started laughing. I was just like, well, here I go again, culturally illiterate. And I just said, I don't know what that means. Can someone explain? And of course, you know, if you have to explain a joke, it's bad. So if you know the person well and you are 100% sure, or maybe 99.5, because we can never be 100, then yes, humor can release tension. It's also good if you make a joke that you're hoping has a lesson, right? Within the middle of every joke is a nugget of learning. Follow up with the person and say, I made that joke, and you know, my intention was to just gently remind you that's not okay. Are you all right? Did I hurt your feelings in any way? Check in, like actively, so that you make sure your jokes are having the impact that you intended. Love that question.
I could tell there were some wheels turning because we have more questions coming in. This is great.
Okay.
Keep them coming. We'll answer as many as we can. For someone wanting to lead or start these conversations within our industry, where is the first place you would send them for additional education or information?
So depending on your organization, I would suggest, if it's a more secular organization, I would suggest the Seen on Radio, Seeing White podcasts. Take those 1 week at a time for, I think it's 10 weeks. And that's a great way to start an organizational discussion. If you are an organization that leans into the faith-based environment, then I would recommend Seeing Whiteness. And you can look that up. It's actually a 14-week study program that's been set up for organizations to tackle this topic. But it does have a Christian underpinning. So you need to check out both and decide which might be best for you. That's just one of a million ideas to get started. And if you want to get further ideas, you know, reach out. Maybe we can find a few minutes to talk, you know, one-on-one or exchange an email.
Great. What was the name of the book that you referred to earlier in the deck?
So I referred to 2 books. The first one was Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. And the second one was So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. And let me spell that. Ijeoma. That's her Christian name. And her surname is Oluo.
Can you share steps? Well, first of all, it says thank you for your presentation. Can you share steps a bystander can take when they witness a cringe moment?
Yes, love that question. It's my favorite question. So the first step that we can take is try to notice the reaction. So there's 3 people in that, right? There's the initiator who said the UG statement, the subject who received the horrible feeling, and the bystander, the observer. So the observer needs to check, right, that the subject has had a bad feeling. And if they have, right? You have a choice to make. Let them handle it on their own, or you help them handle it, right? This is active allyship. If you choose to handle it, you say to the initiator, wow, ouch, cringe, yikes. Use an expressive word first so they know what's coming, because they're going to go all defensive. I didn't mean it, right? You say, I know you didn't mean that, but I'm pretty sure that didn't land the way you expected. And then shut up. Let the person have a chance to say, oops, I'm sorry, thanks, you're right. Or I didn't understand that. And then you say, if they say, I don't understand, what do you, defense comes up, why don't we just hold off and talk later? Let them calm down. It's really important that we don't over talk. It makes it worse for the subject if we start duking it out in front of them, okay? So I hope that helps. And that book, Oluo's book, is all filled with ideas. And there's another great book. This is my third book I'll mention. It's called Subtle Acts of Exclusion. It's by Tiffany with 2 F's, Jana, Jana, and I think it's Michael Barron. They're 2 authors, but it's called Subtle Acts of Exclusion. And that is a whole book on that question. What to do when you observe a cringe moment.
I think that was a great question. And that's our last question we have. We are running out of time, but I want to read 2 of the last comments. One was Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man on YouTube is a great and simple source for seeing a different perspective on race. So that was suggested. And then someone, I think this is a great way to wrap up our time together. This webinar was excellent as part of the DLP 2021 group. I gained so much insight. Thank you. Olivia, this has been great. We will have more webinars in the future, but this one today, not only was it educational, but it was very thought-provoking, and I think it was very timely in so many ways. So thank you for spending part of your day with us today, Olivia.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I put the Stay Connected screen up, so hopefully you get my email. And a big favor that you could do for me, offer some suggestions. I am going to be delivering this presentation to another group the end of next week. And if there's something I could do more of or do less of, or, you know, things you really liked I should keep doing, please put some suggestions for me. It would be a huge favor.
Thank you so much. And thank you for those of you that have participated in today's webinar. Stephanie, did you have any last minute comments before us before we wrap things up?
Nope, that's everything. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Olivia. This was such a great webinar. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Olivia. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Have a great day.